On a bustling morning at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, the world's leaders gathered for a critical session on pressing global issues, ranging from food security and climate change to international cooperation. Amidst the sea of seasoned diplomats and heads of state, there stood a figure whose presence commanded attention not only for his youth but for the fierce determination he exuded. Ibraim Traoré, the 36-year-old president of Burkina Faso, stepped up to the podium with a calm yet resolute demeanor, ready to deliver a message that would resonate across the globe. As Traoré stood before the General Assembly, his message was one of strength, self-reliance, and a call to arms for African nations to embrace their own potential. Africa cannot continue to rely on aid from the West, he declared, his voice calm but firm. We must take control of our future. We must feed ourselves. We must build our own economic infrastructure. And we must challenge the systems that have kept us dependent for too long. The Rice for All initiative. One of the cornerstones of Traoré's vision for Burkina Faso's future is the Rice for All program, which aims to increase local food production, reduce dependence on imports, and eventually turn Burkina Faso into a net exporter of rice. The plan is ambitious, requiring a concerted effort across the agricultural, governmental, and private sectors, but Traoré's leadership has already begun to inspire confidence. Under his guidance, Burkina Faso has seen improvements in its agricultural sector, with rice production levels steadily rising and rural communities increasingly involved in the production process. In his address to the UN, Traoré made it clear that this initiative is not just about feeding his people, it is about reasserting Africa's ability to feed itself. By shifting the focus from aid dependency to self-sufficiency, he is also changing the narrative around African development. In many ways, the Rice for All program is not just a policy, it is a political statement. It speaks to Traoré's broader vision for African unity, regional cooperation, and the need for African nations to look inward for solutions, rather than relying on external assistance. His focus on food security is particularly timely given the global challenges posed by climate change, war, and economic inequality, as the world grapples with growing uncertainty about food supplies. Traoré's emphasis on sustainable agriculture is seen by many as a crucial step forward for a continent that has long struggled with food insecurity. His work in this area is both a direct response to Burkina Faso's challenges and a broader challenge to the traditional aid-based model that has often overlooked the structural needs of African nations. A revolutionary leader for Africa. At the United Nations, Ibraim Traoré's speech was more than just a policy address, it was a declaration of intent. His presence at the international stage was not merely symbolic. It was a challenge to the very way Africa is viewed by the rest of the world. For too long, African nations have been treated as passive recipients of aid, their futures dictated by international organizations and foreign powers. Traoré is rewriting that narrative, presenting himself as a leader who is determined to change the trajectory of his country, and of Africa itself. His speech reverberated throughout the hall, with mixed reactions. Some applauded his courage and vision, while others saw his remarks as a direct challenge to the established global order. For many African leaders, however, Traoré's words resonated deeply. His call for self-reliance, independence, and dignity reflected a growing sentiment across the continent, a desire to break free from the legacy of colonialism and foreign dominance. Ibraim Traoré is not just a leader of Burkina Faso, he is becoming a symbol of change for Africa. His leadership represents the beginning of a new era, one where African nations will no longer be passive recipients of international aid but active contributors to the global economy. As his message continues to spread, it is clear that Traoré's vision is one that challenges the status quo and aims to redefine what it means to be an African leader in the modern world. A future to be built by Africans, for Africans, while the world's attention is often drawn to the political and economic struggles of African nations. Ibraim Traoré is shifting the focus. He is demonstrating that Africa has the potential to shape its own future. And that future does not have to rely on the aid and charity of external powers. It is a future that is being built by Africans, for Africans, and Ibraim Traoré is leading the charge. In the coming years, the success or failure of Traoré's initiatives will likely have a profound impact on the rest of Africa. His work is already setting a precedent, and his message is resonating deeply within African countries that have long been caught in a cycle of dependency. If his plans succeed, Burkina Faso could become a shining example of what is possible when a nation takes control of its own destiny. If they fail, they will be a cautionary tale, but one that will not deter Traoré from continuing his fight for a stronger, more self-reliant Africa. In the face of global challenges, Ibraim Traoré's message is clear. Africa's time has come, and the time to stand on its own feet, free from the constraints of aid dependency, is now. As the world watched Ibraim Traoré's bold speech at the United Nations General Assembly, One of the most important figures not physically present in the room, yet deeply affected by the words spoken, was former US President Donald Trump, known for his controversial, yet pragmatic, views on foreign relations and global politics. Trump's reaction to Traoré's statements would serve as a key moment in this story, a moment that encapsulated the ongoing tension between traditional Western dominance and the shifting winds of global self-reliance. Particularly in Africa, Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, is no stranger to international diplomacy. But his approach has always been grounded in a particular brand of realism. Where others see long-term alliances, multilateral cooperation, and global partnerships, Trump sees national interests, transactional deals, and the necessity of protecting American power on the world stage. His foreign policy, marked by slogans like "America First," often distanced the United States from traditional global commitments, such as the Paris Climate Accord and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and instead emphasized a preference for bilateral agreements that favored U.S. interests. Trump's worldviews have been heavily influenced by his business background, seeing global relations more as a series of business transactions rather than humanitarian collaborations. Under his leadership, the U.S. pulled out of various international agreements, focusing instead on short-term gains for the American economy, sometimes to the detriment of long-standing global relationships. It was this mindset that shaped his reaction to Ibraim Traoré's declaration of Africa's ambition for self-sufficiency, particularly in food production. When Donald Trump heard Ibraim Traoré's speech at the United Nations, he was not pleased, known for his unfiltered remarks and his tendency to react strongly to challenges. Trump saw in Traoré's speech not a symbol of empowerment for African nations but rather a direct threat to the long-standing influence that the United States had cultivated over decades, particularly in the realm of foreign aid. Back in New York, after the speech had concluded, Trump was visibly disturbed. He had been watching the session remotely, his sharp eyes fixed on the screen as the young president of Burkina Faso spoke with confidence. Traoré's announcement of the Rice for All program, designed to make Burkina Faso self-sufficient in food production, thereby reducing its reliance on international aid, struck a chord with Trump. But not in the way that might have been expected. To Trump, it seemed as though Traoré was undermining the US's role as a global leader in humanitarian aid. Trump's reaction was swift and visceral. He immediately called for a meeting with his advisors. As they gathered in his office, he pointed to a picture of Traoré on the screen, his face a mixture of confusion and anger. "Who is this guy?" Trump asked, referring to Ibraim Traoré. "He thinks he can replace what we've been doing for decades. He thinks he can just take over the food security programs we've established." The room fell into a moment of awkward silence. Trump's advisors scrambled to explain that Traoré was not aiming to challenge U.S. efforts directly but was instead promoting a vision of African self-reliance, an important distinction that seemed to evade Trump's immediate comprehension. For Trump, the concept of a nation like Burkina Faso, or any African country for that matter, stepping away from aid dependency and seeking to replace international assistance with local agricultural production, was not just surprising, it was infuriating. To him, it was a bold challenge to the narrative that the US had carefully constructed over the years, that American assistance was not only essential but irreplaceable. His years of overseeing US aid programs like USAID made him view Traoré's statements as an affront to American generosity. Trump's reaction to Traoré's speech was not only a personal attack on the individual but also a repudiation of a larger shift in global politics. To Trump, the concept that an African nation might look inward, strengthen itself through its own resources, and reject aid was seen as a direct challenge to the traditional power dynamics. His response was marked by disdain for Traoré's boldness and a defensiveness about the role of the United States in African development. "This is an insult," Trump muttered under his breath as he paced around the room. "We've been helping them for years. And now they want to figure it out on their own. No way." His tone was filled with disbelief, as if he could not comprehend why a country that had been dependent on aid for so long would suddenly want to change that relationship. For Trump, the notion of self-sufficiency in Africa, especially coming from a young, relatively inexperienced leader like Traoré, was unacceptable. His reaction was both personal and ideological. Africa had been dependent on Western assistance for decades, and now that dependency was being questioned. To Trump, this was more than a policy disagreement, it was an existential challenge to the foundation of American foreign aid. Trump's response also reflected deeper concerns about the global economy and the shifting power dynamics in international relations. For years, the US had been the dominant player in the global aid network, providing not only financial support but also shaping the economic landscapes of many developing nations. Trump, with his keen business instincts, understood the strategic value of maintaining American influence through aid programs. By introducing a self-reliant model, Traoré was disrupting this system in a way that Trump could not ignore. The Rice for All initiative, which aimed to make Burkina Faso a net exporter of rice, was a revolutionary step in African development, one that Trump, as a pragmatist, saw as an unwanted complication. His reaction was part of a broader anxiety about the erosion of American influence in global affairs, particularly in regions like Africa, where the US had long held sway. Despite his personal anger, Trump was also pragmatic. As the situation unfolded, he knew he had to act quickly to reaffirm America's commitment to Africa, lest other leaders begin to follow Traoré's lead. His solution was to double down on US foreign aid, promising greater investments in food security programs across the continent. However, his stance on aid was framed in a way that made it clear he viewed Traoré's model as both misguided and dangerous. Trump's response to Traoré's initiative underscored his belief in American exceptionalism, a belief that the US had a unique role to play in the world's development efforts. But as the debate grew more heated, it also highlighted the emerging shift in global politics. As Trump moved to reinforce US dominance in Africa, he inadvertently pushed many African leaders to see the value of the path that Traoré was laying out. In the days that followed, Trump's criticism only seemed to reinforce the resolve of leaders like Traoré. As word of his strong reaction spread, other African countries began to take notice. Some leaders were privately supportive of Traoré's call for African self-reliance, seeing in it a possible template for their own nations. The idea that Africa could break free from foreign aid was starting to take root. Trump, however, remained steadfast in his view that US assistance was irreplaceable. When asked about Traoré's plans during a public interview, Trump responded with his usual bluntness. Does he think he can do better than the US? Good luck, but let's see how long he lasts without our aid. Despite this, Trump's statements and his focus on reinforcing US aid programs only further highlighted the growing tension between his approach and the new wave of African leadership. The contest was not just about foreign aid, it was about the future of Africa's development, and whether the old systems of dependency would continue to dominate or whether self-reliance would take hold. Trump's reaction, while initially dismissive, may have inadvertently accelerated the shift toward African self-sufficiency, as leaders like Ibraim Traoré refused to bow to the pressures of external dependency.